So the business shuttered in June 2021, and I was shouldered with personal guarantees on 2 trucks, an SBA loan that had a secondary mortgage against my home that exceeded the home's value. I think $35K in credit card debt, all within the business. And I had depleted about $70K from my retirement savings.
One question for you, just to sort of kick this off. If you could have dinner with any 3 people, living or dead, who would you choose?
I would go with Charlie Munger,
Okay.
Dwayne Johnson.
Like The Rock.
Yeah.
Okay.
And yeah, I'll go with that one. Jocko Willink.
Oh, man, that would be a fascinating dinner party. Like all 3 at the same dinner party. I think The Rock and Jocko would probably get along.
Charlie would just be bitter.
Maybe the outlier.
Warren's probably a better conversationalist than Charlie, but
maybe. Well, you'd have, anyway, he has passed away, so that makes it even more interesting. Well, cool, man. I really do appreciate you being here. I really appreciate you telling your story. We're going to go for a little bit. I'm going to ask some questions, but it's just going to be a pretty informal conversation. So, but we'll kick it off here. So, share a specific moment in your life when you experienced failure or significant failure. What was the goal? What were you trying to achieve? What went wrong? Let's just start there and dig into it.
Yeah. So I've touched on it briefly, but in 2023, in 3 weeks, I became a father, quit my W-2, and bought a business. I bought this business for $300K. I went SBA, conventional route, like all the way. And at the time, I had looked at I was on the boring business acquisition train of like, oh yeah, find a boring business. So I was like, man, there's not much more boring than a gutter. And it just kept kind of coming back, and we thought we could do a lot of value add into the business with like pressure washing, or it was actually really gutter cleaning primarily. So there's some interesting things with that deal, which we can talk more about and what happened. But fast forward to this spring of this year, and I realized that I'm robbing Peter to pay Paul, and the business is crumbling. Like it's just falling apart. I can't figure out what's going wrong. In retrospect, I believe that part of the stipulation with the deal when I bought the business was that I didn't get to retain employees. I had to hire my own, and I was like, it's pretty simple. I feel like I can do that. I can learn that job. I've hired many other people in white collar positions from a fintech company that I used to work for 8 years in like contact center work. Blue collar employees threw me for a loop. They were very, very, very different. And I was not prepared for that. I thought it was just going to be something I could work through. So our productivity tanked, and because of the weird seasonality within like being leaf dependent and primarily being a cleaning business at the time, that it was really, really fast, and then we'd like catch up, and I could never really quite realize that like, oh, our productivity is not what it used to be, because I never had an employee stay on that could do that. So the business shuttered in June 2021, and I was shouldered with personal guarantees on 2 trucks, an SBA loan that had a secondary mortgage against my home that exceeded the home's value. I think $35K in credit card debt, all within the business. And I had depleted about $70K from my retirement savings that I had justified at the time as like not burning the ships, but disassembling the ships to build catapults, because we took the money from the 401 and from the things that just were not growing as much as they had been, and decided to expand the business into installation. So I bought a machine. It was like 13K machine that would run gutter. You just put coil in and it prints it out. So you can do seamless installs. And then I was working to find the employees, and all the employees cost more. And it took so long to get the machine into a place where we could use it. Got a trailer for it. Like a lot of it was financed. By the time we got it functional, the installer and the sales guy and that team, we were making money. We were moving the needle in the right direction, but it was already too much damage had been done. So
let me can I stop you right there? I want to. I mean, this is. I can't wait to sort of get into the details of this story, man. This is there's a lot here, and I'm I'm eager to sort of dig in and kind of understand more. But I want to get some details kind of in the very beginning here. So you quit your W-2 and you had a baby and you bought a business all in the same week. You sort of like said that, and you highlighted, but like that's huge, right?
Yeah, that was 3 weeks apart. So it was,
okay.
And I had been working on this deal. When we did the deal, we start to finish, it only took 53 days, and we went with SBA because the season for cleaning was starting like May 6th or something like that. So there was like a time, like after that point, so a big part of this business that'll play into the story too is that because it was cleaning agreements that they did, they would prepay for cleaning. So if you were a customer and you wanted 3 cleanings a year, you could prepay me for that, and then it would give you a little discount, and then we show up and just clean your house as the leaves fall. Well, that is essentially was part of the problem. So they had already sold a bunch of stuff in the beginning of the year from February and March, and they were transferring that over to me. So I bought the business for 300K and then was transferred 160K of working capital that was really unprepaid income or prepaid, like unfulfilled income, essentially like a customer loan of 160K. And I was using that to build and grow. And through that time, just like kind of burned through that cash. So yeah, we've been working through that deal. I had told my W-2 that like after I have my kid, I'm gonna go on leave. They thought I was just gonna be on leave. And it ended up like she came 2 weeks early. And so then I was kind of out for like a week. And as soon as I secured financing, I had changed the narrative with my employer that like SBA is going to go through. I'm buying this business. I'm actually leaving the company. I'm not going to be on leave. Like I'm leaving. And because she came 2 weeks early, it all happened like super fast. So it was like I had the kid.
Wow.
A week later, I was like no longer working. I had like my job was done, and like a week after that. So it was really, I guess, like within 2 weeks. We lived in Durango, Colorado when I met my wife. That's where we started our escape room business. They closed during COVID. We were shouldered with a bunch of debt there. We had moved into our parents' basement to avoid filing bankruptcy. It was kind of funny how like we couldn't avoid it. So we did end up filing bankruptcy in September on this business.
Oh wow.
So we went through. We were in St. Louis. We had kind of been around there. So after our first business closed in 2020, the Conundrum, we actually built a camper van, which is all these pictures behind me from our travel coast to coast. We had lived in my parents' basement when we built the van, traveled for a year, got pregnant with our daughter, bought a house in St. Louis because real estate was actually affordable and I had family there that could help. And we thought like, oh, because it's affordable, it's like a good financial decision. In retrospect, it didn't align with any of my values, and I was pretty miserable going back to St. Louis. I'm very clear that I can't do that again. I know I need to be in like the mountains or a place where I can recreate. And so when this business closed, it was like, oh, we can come back to Colorado.
Gotcha. Wow. So it's been there's a lot. There's some interesting history there, for sure. We'll hopefully get back to that. So why? Tell me this. Why did you want to leave your W-2?
Man, I was paid like 120 a year. I was paid really, really well, and I was bored out of my mind. So I worked in credit card processing. when I started in that career in 2014, I had just been laid off from a job in hospitality. And it was, Durango is a pretty small town. There's maybe 20, 30,000 people there. And
Right.
we, they had this brand new, nice building, glass windows right on the river. Like all my lunches, I would go fish on my lunch down in there. It was amazing. And I was like, man, they're doing this company is going really well. Let's apply and see if I can get in. I got a job, moved up very, very quickly. And then every year for the next 6 years at that company, they went through some type of merger or acquisition where we rebranded, and never a good one. It was always like 5 years later, we were still supporting all of like the different companies, but they just kept like piling stuff on. And they've since completely shuttered that branch in that location because it was so small. And it just became obsolete after acquisition and synergies, etc. So I had seen acquisition and I had seen it done, in my opinion, poorly. I got another job, the same line of work at a startup company, and was working with them, with my old team and my old bosses. And the particular client that we were supporting was just a complete pain in the butt. High demands. We didn't really have any choice to choose our customer in a different way, and it was just absolutely miserable. So I didn't have to work necessarily super hard, but I got kicked around a lot by the customer, and then just kind of had to deal with it. And that was miserable. And I felt like I really needed to strike out and do my own thing and do something that would change my financial future. That was the whole intention, was like to grow it. So I looked at acquisition, then a small business acquisition, when I started to like key in on that around 2022. It was like towards the end of 2022 that I started to realize that. I just started diving hard into research on what that would look like. And the play was going to be to acquire a business, add value, systemize, add technology into a service-based business that I was very familiar with, but I feel like service-based businesses lack a lot, and grow that to exit within 2 to 3 years. That was going to be the strategy.
And so the gutter business was a part of that goal to, one, exit your W-2, do something for yourself, build a business, and ultimately, achieve some more financial either return or, as we talk about, freedom. But I think that's a loaded word and a loaded concept. But that's not. We can get into that maybe a little bit later. But so that was the idea behind this gutter business that you purchased to scale that. Okay. So we started getting into it a little bit, but what went wrong? You mentioned employees. Based on this vision that you had, it sort of went a different direction. Maybe talk about that a little bit more.
Yeah. So it's really hard to like pinpoint specifically what went wrong. There was a lot happening. I remember working, a lot of what I worked with for like this first 6 months of coaching was, in retrospect, I kept feeling like I was trying to hang on to control of some sort. Like I was needing to control the environment, and I felt like there would be these moments where things would just feel like they were falling apart, right? So like the visual would be, if I was like making a clay pot and I'm like working the clay, then like repeatedly chunks just keep falling off and it's like too dry and I can't work it. And I just kept trying to force it back together. So I wasn't asking for a lot of help from like external people, like when I needed. I didn't really know how what was happening. I know I was burning through finances. So there were a couple things there. I definitely abdicated my role as like a CFO, as the business owner. I was like, oh, cool. I got like a bookkeeping thing. Like, boom, we got it. And there were continual issues with like things disconnecting from the tool, from finances not actually being like a super clear picture because of delays. So that definitely played a factor into my decision making. If you're looking at a cloudy mirror, you can't see, or cloudy window, you can't see exactly where you need to go. So I was making bad decisions that way. And then the other part was because I didn't retain, and I think probably the biggest factor was the employees that I had. It happened twice to me where an employee would not show up on like a Thursday or a Friday. I'd be like, well, I guess they're fired. So I'd like go through payroll, like take them off. Monday they would show up and be like, hey man, sorry, I haven't been in touch. I was in jail for the past 3 days. It was like, dude, like your decisions matter. Your decisions affect a lot more than just you. Like I have customers calling and getting pissed at me because we couldn't do their work. We were just not getting through production. So the crew that the old owner used to have, and I can touch on that briefly. So he was given this gutter business, 25-year-old gutter business that he had when I bought it. His dad gave it to him on a client list that he built when he was like a firefighter. And over the years, because of the seasonality, they would always try to like introduce different things. So they would try to do like power washing or roof cleaning, and they ended up with groundwater management, which was like a natural progression from guttering. So it's like it comes off your house, it goes, and then it like would hit at the ground, and then the customer would be like, well, now what? Now water's coming into my basement, so it's not moving far enough away from the house. So they got into like moving that way, and that business took off for them. So these like two different books of businesses, which they had branded independently under the same LLC, and I bought the guttering part of the business because he wanted to get rid of that. Because of that, all his employees that he had for the seasonal work, he kept on the groundwater management stuff. So they had a training program where I got to train with them for like 6 weeks with my people. But by the time they were gone, not one of my people that I had hired stayed on. Because when I was going through the acquisition process, it was like, all right, I close on this, and then we start jobs in like a week. So I was interviewing people ahead of that, and trying to learn if they were a good employee or fit for me, for my company, when I didn't even own the company. So like nobody could find any information on me. It was very challenging to hire people in that kind of situation.
Yeah.
And that just kind of compounded. I eventually found a good manager who could help me get out of the day-to-day. So when I first bought the company, the crew manager I had hired, he showed up. He actually didn't show up the first day of work. And then by like the third or fourth day, I remember I drove him home because he was living out of motels. And I was like, hey man, I like you a lot, but you're not my crew manager. Like you have too much going on in your personal life. It's too in flux. Like you're not organized enough to be able to organize a team and get these things done. And you got to show up for work. And you didn't even do that on the first day. I was like, so you're welcome to make your own decision. You can leave. You're not going to be my crew manager. Or if you want to stay on, I'll keep you on as a regular crew. You just have a demotion and pay. And that's what he ended up choosing. Still never worked out. But then I was working 16-hour days as a result of not having a crew manager. And for those of you keeping track, I had a newborn. So
yeah.
I had a newborn in this new business. I'm working 16-hour days. I'm doing all of the managing, all the route planning, because I didn't have an office assistant. I tried to save some money and do it myself, which the owner was adamant that it was very possible and I could do that. Their systems were very archaic, so I also was doing a complete data transfer from their old system into a new system, which was a huge data migration that we hired a VA to help us out with. So all these things were moving in flux, and we're still having to complete 20 jobs a day to stay on track. Well, by the fall, we're totally on our own, and there's more clients in the fall based off of the prepaid. I had to hire all new staff except for my main manager, who I had found, and they were not nearly as productive as the old team ever was. And because of that, when that productivity dropped, I should have raised rates and reduced the amount of workload to provide a better quality. All the customers for the last 2 years during COVID had two of the biggest price increases they had in the 25 years the business was around. So it had been highly advised to me not to raise rates coming into 2024, which I didn't. And as soon as I realized come April that I was at the current trajectory, if I didn't have a massive sale or massive contract come in, I was going to be running out of money by June. Then it was like, shit, you're screwed. And that also means that I collected funds for 2024 jobs that I'm completely unable to fulfill because all that money's gone.
Yeah.
So,
wow.
So that it just crumbled very, very quickly. And I remember there was somebody gave a talk for Emerge. It was the week before Memorial Day, and he had talked about how all the businesses around him were falling apart when he wasn't true to his values. And I felt the exact same thing. I hopped on a call with him like a week or two later. I was like, hey, I appreciate this. So June 1st, that week was like the week where emotionally I plummeted. I was like, everything's falling apart. I was trying to progress my family forward. And I, in the matter of about a year, had a $600 swing in my net worth in the wrong direction.
Wow. I want to go back a second, and because this is a fairly fresh thing, right? I mean, it's this year, right? And you mentioned a few things here that I think are that are important to highlight. You know, when you're saying what went wrong, you said, you know, there was some control, like you were trying to do a lot of things yourself. Um, you know, not paying attention to some of the details, specifically like the bookkeeping, the financing, kind of you're spinning a lot of plates. There were some employee management challenges, right? And then, you know, just ultimately kind of the financial picture long term started to look a little bleak. I mean, those are hard things, right? I think this is why I want to have this conversation, because, you know, when you started off, you're like, I wanted to achieve financial freedom. I wanted to build something for myself. And this thing is sort of tanking, right? And not because of any lack of effort or desire or intention, but there's a lot of things happening at the same time. And you started to get into like, you know, I started going downhill. When did you really, what was the moment you accepted this isn't going to work? And where were you in that moment? Like, what were the emotions that were present?
I remember, so like AES, the Austin event had just happened. It was like a month prior to this. So I was coming off like cloud nine from that event and the connections I had made, and still felt like things were crumbling. So I touched on the control thing briefly, but with my coach, that first 6 months, they talked a lot about control and how it kept falling apart. And the thing that just resonates so much with me that my coach nailed into me repeatedly was, if you feel like you're always trying to maintain control, maybe it was always meant to fall apart. And it just kind of felt like I was clawing at feathers. It was just like you couldn't actually do anything with them. It was not productive. It was like trying to scoop water with your hand. So, you know, I hit this point where coming into this weekend, I'm like, it was right after that talk. I remember looking through my financials again and then kind of having this realization of like, this is completely falling apart right now. Like, I can't hide from this anymore. I kind of like maybe hid it from myself, or maybe hid it from somebody else's, you know, other people, as it was just falling apart. I had been at a retreat in March with my coach and the rest of the people in my coaching group. And that was one of the things that like I had a breakthrough that weekend, was like, my business is not doing well. I'm falling apart. It's crumbling. And this was like the week where I realized, through the financial projections, like based off the stuff that's coming in and the jobs that we have out and where things are and like the time delay with the cash flow, it's like I may not be able to pay my team in like 2 weeks. And that was what really hit me. And I remember telling my wife, like, I don't think I'll be able to make payroll in this amount of time. And that was really, really hard. I remember she was pretty angry with me for a couple months. And I was having to work through some stuff. But I remember that first week, on June 1st, it was like through this weekend, I had texted my coach, and we had actually, for like the last couple of months, had planned on a one-on-one coaching call for his podcast on June 1st. I was like, hey, I still need to meet. I don't know if we should record it or not. But, you know, let's still connect. And told him, I remember I was like, just an emotional wreck. I felt like I had failed at everything. Like the world was falling apart. I was going to lose my house. I was going to lose all kinds of stuff, and, you know, things that I had tried to build, and just this huge like emotional sorrow. And it really felt like free falling. And the best thing that happened from that conversation was to get clear on what the bottom was for me. to truly become crystal clear and identify on what rock bottom was, so that I could be comfortable hitting rock bottom, or understand that there were ways to still entrepreneur your way through the falling experience and mitigate what rock bottom was and where rock bottom ends up, where it ended up. And that was really, really powerful to just get crystal clear on what rock bottom was. So by the end of the week, I was like, okay, I get it. Now I just have to take steps to mitigate that and work through it.
Well, I mean, I guess the next natural question is, what was rock bottom for you?
Yeah, so I had identified rock bottom as I lose my house. The SBA takes my house, takes all the vehicles, all the assets, and then I get sued with criminal fraud from my 270 customers that had prepaid for jobs that hadn't gone. That was like what rock bottom was potentially looking at for me. And once I realized, like, okay, those are the possibilities, that's what it looks like, where do I go from here? And how do I maintain character through this experience? Because it's going to come down to who I act as in these moments that define where I end up.
Yeah, that's pretty heavy.
Yeah. I guess a part of that too was when I thought of losing my house, I was like, to me, that was like being homeless, that I was going to be homeless. And yeah, it's far from that when you start going through and working through the process.
Well, I think what's interesting is when we get to a point, and I love how you phrased it in working with your coach, of when we can sort of think about what is the worst that could happen in this scenario. And I love how you said, if I can maintain my character through this, then I can move forward. Let's talk about since then. What was the first step you took in that moving forward? Once you acknowledge, like, this is failing, this is the worst that could happen, this is my rock bottom, and ultimately you had to move forward from there. Talk about from June or whenever it was, like, what was that step forward? What did you do? How did you move forward?
Yeah. So the biggest thing that at the time, I still had a stigma around bankruptcy in my mind of like, I wanted to avoid bankruptcy at all costs. That's what we did with our first business. We left Durango, we moved into my parents' basement so we could continue to make payments on the loans that we had refied in our old business that had fallen apart during COVID. And I think there was a bit of pride in our ability to like mitigate that without actually having to file and maintain our credit. And looking at this, I was like, okay, well, can I work through that? So I contacted, there was like a specialist I found that did an offer in compromise with the SBA to mitigate things where there was a potential where they might be able to allow us to keep our house so we could like maintain that and like release us of the personal guarantee. And then the other conversation I set up was with a bankruptcy lawyer to see like, what do you think, how does it look like to you? What do you think of this offer and compromise idea? How do we mitigate that? The offer and compromise seemed like it could potentially work. And then after talking with the lawyer, I realized that there was not really going to be any way that I could go through without going through bankruptcy due to the load of the debt that the business had taken on to try to grow and work through. And especially with the 270 customers that had, which were essentially creditors in the eyes of that, they credited me for jobs that I was supposed to perform. And I was not going to be able to do it. So that's where like criminal fraud could have happened. The lawyer let me know that like, yeah, there was like a small possibility of that. The slightly bigger but still small possibility would be civil fraud, like a civil fraud case and being sued for that. And that the best option for both would be if I filed personal bankruptcy first and went through and essentially released all the things that were related to the personal credit and the personal guarantees, then anybody that would try to sue, be it civil or criminal, would typically, people who like to sue don't like to sue with ponying up any money. They want to sue for free. So they find a lawyer who will split profits with them on the back end, and they'll do it for free. But anybody that would see that I filed bankruptcy would know that there would be nothing to take. And so a lawyer would be like, well, you have to pony up a bunch of money. So it just like further niched down the type of person that would be vindictive to do that. So we started to explore what that was like. It took probably 2 months to prepare everything to the point where we could file, just due to the size of the amount of creditors, especially with the 270, because every 270 of those people were listed in the filing of bankruptcy. They all received notices, including people like my parents who were our customers and things like that. So I had to be very clear with them up front about what was going on. We knew that we were going to lose our house. So the lawyer at the certain point, he's like, if you're going to file and you're going to surrender your house, because the SBA has that, there's still $200,000 and our home was maybe valued at 270, with 215, I think, on the mortgage still. So anything extra still wouldn't have covered the SBA loan. Like they had everything with a lien on it. So we knew going that route that that we would lose the house, and that's what kind of gave us the opportunity of like, oh wow, like we could move. And the craziest part is that when we finally got comfortable with the fact that we were going to lose our house and we didn't actually care about holding on to the house that we had lived in for the last 2 years and just, like, raised our firstborn in that home, we were going to be able to move back to Colorado. We actually shaved about $1,500 a month in expenses by making that transition, and moving into a smaller space, which was really cool. So I'm like way happier than we were then. And like it was May when this started to fall apart, mid-May. And then we stopped operations on June 21st. And by like the second week of July, we had a rental that was going to start in the end of August or September that we were going to be able to move into. So we moved in September back on. So, and we filed September 11th through September 12th, which was like the days that we were driving across the country in the van or in the U-Hauls and stuff.
You're trying to hold this thing together, trying to make it work. You identified what is that rock bottom, and then you started going kind of in that direction, be like, all right, like this is not going to work. So we've got to go a different. You acknowledge that. Was there a tangible shift in you and your wife? And I mean, I can kind of sense it in you just talking about it. Like once we kind of let go of it and said this is going to happen and started going a different direction, you're like, actually things started to kind of get a little bit better. I mean, talk about that. Like, was there once you acknowledged all this, was there a shift in stress and anxiety, or was it still there?
There's always been like an undertone of that. I've had a practice of meditation for a while, so I think the meditation has helped me kind of like work through a lot of it. There was definitely like a not necessarily a point, but through the process there has been like an act of surrender to the process and to let it run its course. A couple guys in my pod have been quick to point out that like as far as bankruptcy courts in the world go, the US is one of the best ones that helps entrepreneurs take big jumps and take risk and work through it and try to manage it. So for that, I've become like incredibly grateful. So I started to like find gratitude, I think, in the process and the places, things, how I was going. So there was definitely like a mental shift in realizing that like, yeah, this has happened. This is not the way we wanted it to go, or planned on it going whatsoever. But physically, we're in a better place than we've ever been. I've met my 3 business partners now for the 2 companies that we've kind of already started. all through Emerge and through that community and what we've had, and they're significantly more aligned with my values than the other business was. The other business was probably like the antithesis of my values. There was friction through it the whole time because it just never aligned. I was just like, oh, cool, boring business. Like, I like that idea. I definitely like the idea, and I still do like the idea, but it doesn't. You can like the idea and have it be totally outside your values, and I think you're going to find friction if you don't pick something that is within your values to like the idea.
Can we dig into that a little bit, because it's a couple times you brought that up. What are your values? How are you misaligned, and how are you getting aligned or aligned now? Because I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, it's huge. So I'll share what I found within myself through the deep work and coaching. So since I joined Emerge, I've come into believing that you can get stuck if you just kind of define arbitrary goals. Things have to work in some sort of alignment, and that alignment is actually pretty clear. It starts with your values and what you care about. The endpoint is kind of a vision or the target that you're going to work on, and the goals are then in alignment if they're between the values and the vision. So when I finally figured out what my values were, which are empowered exploration, and I've individually defined these as well for myself. It's not just adventure or whatever. It boils down to care, play, and impact, but it's empowered exploration, meaningful connections, and transformational development. And that's within my body, my mind, my soul, my spirit, the meaningful connections I have through building Socratic questioning, vulnerability, and being honest in conversations. And then empowered exploration. I love to explore the physical world as much as I do the digital and print world. I love to read. I love to work on personal growth. And for me, that was incredibly impactful. And there wasn't really any of those qualities or values that existed within the guttering business. So I was trying to push them in, and it's a little sad, right? I had visions of wanting to help blue collar people become better individuals, and none of the people that I was connecting with cared at all. They were like, I'm perfectly fine being in and out of jail. And that always just kind of hit hard and wrong and rubbed me the wrong way. I wasn't surrounding myself with people that cared about personal development and wanted to become better and serve the world better. They were just worried about where they were going to party, when their paycheck was going to hit, all kinds of stuff. It was just, it was always friction filled because of that.
Yeah. I think that's fascinating. I mean, a couple of things that I hear you talking about is, through this experience, you had people that you were able to go to, right? You had a coach, right? Talk about your relationship, with your wife or your family, if you can. What were those conversations like?
So I'll start with my parents, and kind of touch on a larger community aspect too. So as I started to get comfortable and open up to people that I trusted within my inner circle, I guess, and be honest with hey, this is happening, this is what we're going through. It started to get really interesting. Other people started to share I'm sorry to hear that's happening. If you need help, I'll be happy to listen. I've been there. And it was you've been there? What do you mean? It's finding out that my parents went through bankruptcy in the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, was a huge eye opener. Finding other Emerge people that I had opened up to, that have been around the community, or few years older than me, that had gone through it, was whoa! It became so much better to know that there was other people that had support going through it, or they went through it and they weren't anything less. They were in a better place now than they were then. That was a really, really good point. So I think there's a lot of of guilt and feeling that it still kept coming back to like, I don't feel like I've maintained integrity with the 270 customers that I owe 100K to because of what's happening. And it's kind of still in the back of my mind. Like,
Sure.
I want to get to a point within a future business where I can pay them back and follow up with them in future years. And I believe I will do that. So that was one aspect of like, as I opened up and was more and more vulnerable with people, it was being reciprocated and acknowledged as, yeah, we've been there, we get it. The relationship with my wife, that was pretty interesting. So when we closed the first business, the escape rooms, Conundrum escape rooms, I'll probably just say Conundrum. When we closed Conundrum, she felt like she had shouldered a bunch of guilt. So we had really quick, we had flipped roles. She was the operator of that business and I had in my W-2. So I was when I was still in fintech. And when we started this business, she had her W-2. I was the operator of the business and we would go that way. So we've both of us have been in the opposite role as primary caregiver for our daughter, primary business owner, W-2 earner, or like, who the breadwinner is in the house. We've both shared exactly the same roles, which is really interesting. So when we closed ACE and we were looking at all this, I remember there was a spell of a few weeks, maybe a month or so, where I just felt completely unworthy, unloved. There was no intimacy. Everything was just kind of falling apart. Like I just felt like, wow, this is the end of my marriage too, to a point. And at a certain point, she came to me and said, like, look, I realize I've been bad and I'm sorry. I absolutely love you. I'm not looking at ending this marriage. And she said, how did she say it? It was, I realized that I need to treat you the way I feel I wasn't treated when our other business closed. And it was really interesting because when we closed that last business, I never felt like I had treated her in any kind of negative way or that I wasn't intimate towards her. To me, it was like, okay, this is the problem. We're going to work through the problem. It was like very pragmatic. And it was very eye-opening to me to realize that I might have neglected some other like husbandly duties and emotional duties to my relationship with her at that time. And so as soon as we started talking about that, it more honest and forward and pragmatic we were at the conversation, the better everything came. So the intimacy came back, her support came back. There was still some, I think there still is some rebuilding of trust that I'm having to do because I haven't been able to, I haven't had any kind of paycheck since June 21st of this year, which has been a bit of a challenge. It's kind of been part of the bankruptcy process in order for it to go the best way. So I've been the primary care provider during this whole time. So I've been caring for 1.5-year-old in the mornings and then working at growing the businesses that I'm now a part of in the afternoon. That's been really interesting and strainful on our relationship, but she's recognized that I'm still working to grow that and I have a vision and I'm working to drive towards it. So our relationship is very, very strong again, which is really, really cool.
Yeah. Well, thank you for, going deep with us on that. I think it's important for us to hear, when we go through these experiences, recognizing ourselves and building some self-awareness, but understanding those around. I love what you said about, when you started to be vulnerable yourself, others came forward, even your parents, but you said you didn't, which is a big reason why I want this series is that, we hear entrepreneurs who are incredibly successful say all the time, well, I've made every mistake in the book, or I've failed at this, but we never dig into it. And I think there's a lot of power in sharing these stories. We can shift gears a little bit. We've talked about what happened. We've talked about, the awareness that you created and the acceptance and the coping, strategies or the ways that you got through it. How has this experience shaped your future decisions? You mentioned you have 3 businesses and we've talked about values. Let's kind of talk about, moving forward.
Sure.
What are you up to now? How has this, and the theory is that these experiences are influential if we let them be. And it sounds like you discovered a lot about yourself and, what you want to be aligned with and in alignment with. So talk about, how moving forward, how has this shaped your perspective of not only failure, but future decisions?
Yeah. Um, I saw an Alex Ramosi clip at the time I needed the most, probably, which really shaped my view of failure. And it was talking about how before Jim launched and when he had that like $42 million exit, he failed 9 other businesses before that. Like they all went to zero beforehand, before he hit it big. It's like 9 times. And my thought was like, well, I've had like 3 or 4, so I'm like almost there. It's like good. And the thing that hit me the most was like, it's only failure if you quit. It's only failure if you stop. So if you just keep moving in that direction, like it's not a failure. It's a learning opportunity. So that's vastly shaped how I look at this last experience. What am I doing now? So I have 3 business partners, 2 businesses. So the one, let's see, all of these came about because I was wanting to serve other people. So I was at this interesting point where I want to work. I want to provide value for other people. I think that's innate. I hope it's innate in a lot of people. And I couldn't earn money. So I was kind of put in this position where I was like, okay, how can I give the most value to other people for free? So I started trying to connect with my network a little bit more, check in on people, just like lean into the meaningful connections that I value and care for the most, and see how people were doing, getting them on the phone, and just having a lot of calls very similar to this, honestly, and using vulnerability and putting it out there and expressing that. And the more and more I found opportunities to serve others, the more it turned into like a worthy business relationship. So the one business partner and I started a C2 land company recently. So we're a land investment company. He brought initial operating capital to the table, and then the mastermind that we found has a pool of private equity. So through that community, as well as GoBundance, we've kind of built up a pool of hard money lenders that will be able to invest in properties for us as long as we maintain the operating capital. So that's been huge. And I'm 49% shareholder of that company.
Nice.
And then the other business is with a couple of very close friends who are very visionary and are working on building a brand. And because they're both very visionary, they're kind of all over the place. So they've kind of helped me realize that a power I've had through the 3, 4, 5 businesses that we've kind of started between my wife and I over the last years. We've got a solid amount of like knowledge between different aspects of starting a business and things to consider. And so I'm acting as an integrator for them to get their ideas off the ground. And it's kind of spinning off into its own personal brand that I'm working on, where I can help other entrepreneurs get their businesses going as an integrator and implementer for an equity stake, and then kind of take a back seat and either take a buyout or just maintain equity for a while. So I'm still playing around with that. That idea is pretty fresh in the last couple of months that I'm working on that. And right now we're building a fitness community that will pull in some aspects, kind of like a GoBundance, where we have pods and some other things, but it's still in a pretty fledgling state that we're building out.
Nice. Well, couple of final questions here, and we'll wrap this up. But thinking about others, and being of service, if your word of advice or encouragement during a similar experience of just things are failing, things are not going well, what would you tell someone facing something similar, and or how would you encourage them to help shift their mindset about what is happening?
Yeah, the first thing is probably going to be a tool in my box for a long time is to identify rock bottom and get clear on that rock bottom through like what if the failure would be. There's another, I think it's in it's either 4 Hour Work Week or like Tools of Titans, but Tim Ferriss talks about a really cool tool called fear setting that he's used before, and it's very similar. So if people want to look that up, you just Google like Tim Ferriss fear setting. There's a great little activity, and I've run through a handful of people with that kind of activity before. It's really good. It just kind of helps identify like the fears you might have, and then how you might mitigate them, being like a talented, person that takes action and tries to mitigate situations. Like if you know that there's a fork in the road, you drive straight through the fork and hit the median, you can see ahead of time. And so it's an activity that kind of helps that. So that's really good. The other thing I would tell them if they're feeling friction, well, once they've identified that, is to figure out what their values are. I think it always comes back to values now at this point for me. It's been very profound how much that has played in my life when I finally realized it. And because I've clearly defined that, now I have like lanes, right? Like I want transformational development and meaningful connections. As soon as I'm able to like see somebody coming towards me and it seems like a transaction or some sort of transactional relationship, like, well, it's not, I don't need that. That doesn't fall with my values. I don't need to pursue it. And no matter what they might have that I might be interested in, it's like, okay, how can I give value to other people first? And that became kind of a cornerstone into what's happened with me over the last like 8-9 months.
That's awesome, man. I as we're having this conversation, some of the reflections that I'm having or some of the observations are, you started off with, I wanted to quit my W-2, I wanted to build something, I wanted financial freedom, and you went out and have done a few things and it didn't work out because ultimately it was all about the money, right? Of like trying to, which I think this is why I go back to financial freedom is something that's just, it's a buzzword, and I don't think, I think it's a thing, but like what you've defined for me and what you've sort of helped me realize is that freedom comes through living your values, being in alignment with who you are, and money follows that, right? Because it's authentic, and so I think that's a really powerful lesson to take away from this. And so, Chris, I really appreciate you bringing the heat, man. That was heavy at times, and I know some of it's still fresh, and I appreciate you getting vulnerable with us and with me, and like my hope is that your story will encourage others. I think the tools of identifying rock bottom, and I'm going to look up fear setting, but that was a really powerful moment as well. So I've never thought about that, but I think that's this idea of acceptance. And to accept something, you have to first sort of define what it is and be like, okay, this is where I am, or this is where I'm headed. I can move on from there. And I love the idea of character as well, man. I know you'll someday be able to pay all those customers back. And that'll be an incredible moment, an incredible story. And I can't wait to hear you talk about that at some point. So
yeah, I do. I have 2 other thoughts as you were kind of saying that were really cool. So one is, because of the bankruptcy and all that, I'm pretty much blackballed from any kind of like standard government lending. A lot of people could look at that as like a oh no, like you couldn't do any kind of FHA real estate leveraging or anything like that. To me, I look at it as like a superpower. It's like, okay, I've narrowed the constraints. Now I can truly be artistic and like figure out other ways, because that's not like, just because that's not an option doesn't mean there's no other way to do it. So I think that was like one kind of cool thing. The other thing, just as like an update, as of Friday of last week, the bankruptcy was actually approved. So there's a huge process where it kind of goes through. And because we were pursuing Chapter 7, over the next 2 to 4 weeks, I'll have like another $300,000 swing back towards zero, where I can continue to rebuild and go from there. So that was like really good news as of last Friday, which is pretty cool.
Yeah. Well, I guess congrats.
It's a weird, it's a strange,
it's a weird, yeah.
It is, it was a big learning opportunity. What I've kind of realized is like, I don't necessarily want to go through it, but it's also not the worst thing. Like I still have my family. I'm
right
in a physically happier place.
Yeah.
There's a lot more sunshine. It's nice. So.
Right. Right.
better spot.
Well, I think about the saying of, it's just brick by brick, man. You just keep moving forward, just keep laying bricks, and it'll all work out. So I'm excited for what you're doing. I look forward to hearing more about it. And it was just good to meet you, first of
Yeah.
all.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Same.